The transport ship descended through the thick orange clouds of the planet Xylos. Inside, a single human woman sat strapped into her seat. Her name was Sumin. The ship shook violently as it entered the atmosphere, but Sumin remained still. Her hands were clasped tightly in her lap. She watched the viewport where the sky turned from orange to a deep bloody red. The ship landed with a heavy thud. The hatch opened with a hiss. A wave of hot, thin air washed over her. The gravity on Xylos was heavier than Earth's. Sumin felt it immediately. It was like wearing a heavy coat made of stone. She unstrapped herself and stood up. Her legs felt the extra weight. She took a slow, deep breath and walked down the ramp. Before her stretched a landscape of sharp purple rock and strange crimson plants with leaves like twisted blades. The light from the system's star was pale and harsh. And standing in a perfect silent group were the other recruits. They were Vulcar. They were much taller and broader than any human. They were covered in thick gray fur. Their faces were long with powerful jaws and sharp, intelligent eyes that glowed with a faint yellow light. They had strong legs and heavy arms ending in claws. They did not speak. They communicated with low rumbles in their chests and slight movements of their ears and tails. To Sumin, they looked like a pack of giant wolves standing on two legs. They all turned to look at her as she approached. Their silence was more intimidating than any noise. Their eyes scanned her from head to toe. She saw their nostrils flare, taking in her scent. She knew what they smelled. A creature with no fur, no claws, and fragile bones. A creature that did not belong. The largest of the Vulcar took a step forward. His fur was a darker gray and a series of old scars ran across his muzzle. This was Deho. He was the pack leader. A low growl started in Deho's chest. It was not a sound of anger but of judgment. The other Vulcar shifted their weight, understanding the meaning. The growl meant, "This is not one of us. This is not strong." One of the others, a female named June, let out a short, sharp huff of air. The scent she released was one of dismissal. Another male, a broad-shouldered Vulcar named Taishik, turned his head away completely, a clear sign of ignoring something unimportant. Sumin stopped a few meters from them. She did not try to speak their language. She simply stood there, waiting. A new Vulcar, an instructor with a sleek black coat and a data slate in his hand, walked towards the group. His name was Instructor Bay. His voice was a deep, rumbling baritone. "The 223rd Legion is now complete," he said, his eyes passing over the Vulcar and then resting for a moment on Sumin. "Your training begins now. Your first test is a trek. You will cover 50 kilometers through the razor-vine forests to the northern ridge. The path is marked. You must reach the campsite before nightfall." He looked directly at the pack. "The pack moves as one. The strength of one is the strength of all." Deho gave a sharp nod. He turned to his pack and let out a single commanding bark. It was the signal to move. As one, the Vulcar turned and began to lope down the marked path. Their movements were effortless. Their powerful muscles propelled them forward, their bodies perfectly adapted to the high gravity. They did not look back. Sumin was left standing alone. She adjusted the straps of her pack and started to walk. Her pace was not a run. It was not even a fast walk. It was a slow, deliberate, and careful step. She knew she could not match their speed. Her goal was not to keep up. Her goal was to finish. The path led into the forest. The trees were a dark, menacing purple, and between them grew the razor vines. They were thin, wire-like plants covered in microscopic, glass-sharp spines. Brushing against one would mean deep, painful cuts. The Vulcar pack moved through the forest like a flowing river. They weaved through the trees and vines without breaking stride. Their thick fur protected them from the minor scratches. Sumin had no such protection. Her first hour was slow. She had to stop often to examine the path ahead, finding ways around the thickest patches of vines. Sometimes she had to get on her hands and knees to crawl under low-hanging clusters. The heavy gravity made every movement an effort. Her breaths came in deep, controlled pulls. Meanwhile, the Vulcar pack was already far ahead. They moved in perfect sync. Deho led from the front, setting a punishing pace. June and Taishik ran at his flanks. Occasionally, one of them would glance back, but they saw nothing. The human was already lost behind them. After 2 hours, the pack came to a steep, rocky incline. It was a slope of loose scree and sharp rocks. The Vulcar powered up it, their claws digging into the ground for purchase. They reached the top without slowing. Sumin reached the base of the incline much later. She looked up at the difficult climb. Her muscles ached. She took a drink of water from her tube and began to climb. She did not try to run. She placed each foot carefully, testing the rocks before putting her full weight on them. She used her hands, gripping the more stable rocks. It was a slow, methodical process. Halfway up, a rock gave way under her foot. She slid down several meters, scraping her hands and knees on the sharp stones. She did not cry out. She simply stopped, checked for serious injury, and started climbing again. As the pale sun began to dip in the sky, the Vulcar pack arrived at the campsite on the northern ridge. They were not even tired. They began the routine of setting up a defensive perimeter and preparing to rest. The work was done without a single word, only gestures and low rumbles. Deho stood at the edge of the ridge, looking back the way they had come. The forest stretched out below, vast and darkening. The others gathered near him. June sat, cleaning a minor scratch on her arm. The soft skin will not make it, she rumbled, her scent carrying certainty. The forest will break her. Taeshik nodded in agreement. She is a burden. The instructor was wrong to bring her. She weakens the idea of our legion. Deho listened. His eyes continued to scan the forest. He finally spoke, his voice final. She is not of the pack. We do not waste energy on those who are not pack. We will continue to train. We will not speak of her again. This was his official decree. By declaring her outside the pack, he freed them from any responsibility for her. She was now a non-entity. Her success or failure was her own. The pack accepted this. They began to settle in for the night, their bodies curled on the hard ground, their senses still alert to the dangers of the world around them. But as the last light of day painted the sky in shades of deep purple and red, a small movement caught Deho's eye. Far below, at the very top of the difficult scree slope they had climbed hours ago, a tiny figure appeared. It was Sumin. She stood for a moment at the crest of the ridge, silhouetted against the dying light. She was impossibly small against the vast landscape. Then she began the final descent towards the campsite. Her walk was not a triumphant stride. It was the same slow, relentless, plodding walk she had used all day, one foot in front of the other. She did not look up at them. She was focused only on the path directly ahead. The Vulcar pack had finished their trek with ease and speed. Sumin was finishing with sheer stubborn will. From a distance, the pack watched the solitary human complete the journey they had deemed impossible for her. They did not make a sound, but in the quiet of the Xylos night, the sight of her created a small, uncomfortable silence in their minds. The Vulcar camp was a model of silent efficiency. As the pale sun vanished, the large aliens settled into a defensive ring, their bodies forming a living wall against the dangers of the night. Their yellow eyes glowed faintly in the dark, scanning the tree line. They did not need a fire. Their thick fur protected them from the chilling cold that descended on the ridge. Sumin stopped a respectful distance from their circle. She did not ask to join them. She knew the answer. She found a spot near a large, sheltered rock formation that offered some protection from the wind. Her movements were slow and pained as she took off her pack. Her shoulders ached from the constant pull of the heavy gravity. Her hands were raw from the climb. She sat with her back against the cold stone and opened her pack. She pulled out a concentrated nutrition bar and ate it slowly, taking small sips of water from her tube. Her eyes were not on the imposing forms of the Vulcar, but on the dark forest around them. She listened to the strange clicks and rustles of the Xylos night, her head tilted, learning the sounds. From the edge of the Vulcar ring, two smaller pairs of eyes watched her. They belonged to Chinsun and Hana. They were cubs, not yet full-grown members of the pack. They were here to observe and learn. Their fur was softer, their frames lankier than the powerful adults. The adults ignored the human. She was not pack, but the cubs were curious. Why does she sit alone? Hana whispered, her voice the softest of rumbles. The cold will make her slow. Chinsun, her brother, flicked an ear. She is different. Look at her hands. She has no claws. How does she fight? Their attention was broken by a low growl from Deho. It was time to sleep. The cubs settled down, curling against the warm flank of an adult, but their eyes stayed on the solitary human for a long time. The next morning, Instructor Bay arrived as the first light touched the sky. The training for the day was survival. They were to find their own food and water. The land provides, Instructor Bay stated, but only for those who are smart enough to take it. The adult Vulcar did not wait for further instruction. As a group, they moved into the forest with a new purpose. Their strategy was simple and direct. They used their powerful sense of smell to locate a large six-legged creature that burrowed under the rocks. It was a tough, armored beast. The hunt was loud and brutal. Taishik and June worked together to dig it out of its hole. Daeho led the attack, his powerful jaws and claws finally overwhelming the creature after a fierce, noisy struggle. They tore into the fresh meat, sharing it among the pack. It was a display of pure, raw strength. Sumin had watched the beginning of the hunt from her rock. When the noise and violence started, she turned and walked quietly in the opposite direction. The cubs who had been watching the hunt saw her leave. They looked at each other, then back at the feeding adults. No one noticed them slip away. They followed Sumin at a distance, using the thick crimson foliage for cover. They saw her move through the forest not like a hunter, but like a shadow. She did not crash through the undergrowth. She placed her feet with care, making almost no sound. She stopped near a patch of soft ground. The cubs watched, confused. She wasn't looking for big game. She was looking at the ground. She found a small, almost invisible hole. From her pack, she took a spool of thin, glistening wire. It was hyperfilament, stronger than steel. With quiet, precise fingers, she fashioned a small, intricate loop and set it over the hole. She anchored it to a nearby root and covered it with a few loose leaves. Then she moved on. A little while later, she found a different kind of plant, one with broad, bowl-shaped leaves that collected the morning dew. Instead of drinking from them, she looked at the tiny, six-winged insects that were sipping from a different set of leaves nearby. Chin-sun rumbled softly to his sister. "The water in the leaves is clean. Why does she not drink it?" Hana didn't know. They watched as Sumin studied the insects for a long moment. Then she seemed to make a decision. She turned and began walking in the exact direction the insects had come from. The cubs followed, their curiosity growing. After 100 meters, they came to a small, clear stream that trickled over rocks. The water was fresh and safe. Sumin drank her fill and refilled her water container. She had found water not by strength or smell, but by watching and thinking. They followed her back to her first snare. A small rabbit-like animal with long ears was caught in the wire loop. It was not hurt, just held. Sumin approached it calmly. She did not show excitement or aggression. She moved slowly, making a soft, shushing sound. She carefully untangled the animal, her gentle hands avoiding its kicking feet. Then, to the cub's astonishment, she let it go. The creature darted away into the undergrowth. Sumin reset the snare. "Why did she do that?" Hana whispered, utterly confused. "That was food." Chin-sun watched Sumin's face. She hadn't looked disappointed. She had looked satisfied. It was a test, he realized. She was testing her tool. Now she knows it works. Later that day, a new exercise began. It was a simulated ambush. Training charges, which made loud bangs and bright flashes, were set to go off randomly in the forest. The recruits had to identify the threat and react appropriately. The adult Volcar took up positions, their bodies tense, ready to fight the unseen enemy. Their focus was entirely on the forest ahead, their ears swiveling to catch the source of the next explosion. Chin-sun and Hana were told to observe from a small, rocky outcrop that gave a good view of the training area. They were to stay hidden and learn from the adults' tactics. A charge exploded nearby, shaking the ground. The adult pack shifted, growling, moving as a unit to flank the sound. Then, a second charge, much closer to the cubs' hiding spot, detonated. It was louder than the others. A shower of rock and dirt sprayed over them. The surprise and the intense noise startled them. Hana yelped and scrambled backwards, losing her footing on the loose rock. Chin-sun froze for a critical second, his eyes wide. The adult Volcar engaged in their tactical maneuver did not notice. The explosion was just part of the exercise to them, but Sumin, who was moving alone on a ridge high above the training ground, saw it all. Her high position gave her a view the others did not have. She saw the two cubs exposed and startled on the outcrop. Her reaction was instant. She did not shout. She did not run. She made a sharp cutting motion with her hand straight down through the air. It was a clear, universal signal. "Get down." At the same time, her eyes locked with Chin-sun's across the distance. The command in her gaze was absolute. He felt it like a physical push. He dropped flat to the ground, pulling his sister down with him. They pressed themselves against the rock, making themselves as small as possible. They waited, hearts pounding. A long moment passed. Cautiously, Chin-sun lifted his head just enough to peek. The ridge where the human had been standing was empty. She was gone. She had vanished back into the landscape as silently as she had appeared. She had seen the danger, issued a silent order that they instinctively obeyed, and then disappeared, leaving no trace she was ever there. The two cubs lay there in the quiet, the dust from the explosion slowly settling around them. The sounds of the adult Vulkar's training continued in the distance. They were safe. They had not been protected by the strength and power of their pack. They had been protected by the quiet, watchful eyes of the one they all ignored. Hana looked at her brother, her own eyes wide with a new understanding. "She is not weak," she rumbled, her voice full of awe. Chin-sun nodded slowly, his gaze still fixed on the empty ridge. "No," he agreed. "She is not weak at all. The pack is loud, but she is quiet, and she sees everything." The air in the main briefing cave was thick with the scent of focused Vulkar. Instructor Bay stood before them, a holographic map of the sunken chasm glowing in the air beside him. This was the final major training exercise, a capture-the-flag scenario against a rival unit, the 212th Legion, who were already dug in at the far end of the chasm. "The objective is simple," Instructor Bay's voice rumbled. "Take their flag and return it to the starting point. The 212th are strong. They are well fortified. You have 2 days." Daeho, the pack leader, studied the map. His eyes traced the main route through the chasm, a wide, rocky path that led directly to the enemy's position. It was the obvious path. It was also the most heavily defended. He turned to his pack. Jun, Taeshik, and the others gathered close. Their heads dipped together, a low, continuous growl of discussion passing between them. Their plan was pure Vulkar doctrine, a direct, overwhelming assault. They would use their speed and power to hit the enemy's front line hard, create a breach, and let Daeho's strength punch through to the flag. It was a plan of pure force. Throughout this entire planning session, Sumin stood apart. She was near the cave entrance, looking out at the jagged landscape of the chasm. She was not invited to the discussion. She was not even looked at. She was a non-entity, as Daeho had declared. Her role, if she had one, was to follow far behind and stay out of the way. The pack finished their plan. Daeho gave a sharp nod. He turned and, without a backward glance, led his warriors out of the cave at a run. Their heavy footsteps echoed a thunder of purpose and power. They charged down the main path, a single focused unit, quickly disappearing into the dust and haze of the chasm. Sumin watched them go. The sound of their running faded. Silence returned to the cave entrance. She adjusted the strap of her pack and did not follow them. Instead, she turned to the left, towards a sheer, crumbling cliff face that marked the edge of the mapped route. It was a path deemed tactically unsound by the instructors. It was not a path at all. From the shadows at the back of the cave, 2 small figures hesitated. Chin-sun and Hana had been watching everything. They saw their pack leave for glory. They saw the human turn towards a dead end. The cubs looked at each other. The memory of the previous day was fresh in their minds. The silent command, the protective gesture, the quiet competence. The adults saw only what Sumin was not. The cubs had begun to see what she was. "She is not going with the pack," Hana whispered, her ears drooping with confusion. "The pack's path is loud," Chin-sun rumbled, his eyes fixed on Sumin's retreating back. "The enemy will be waiting. Her path is quiet." It was a choice that went against every instinct. To split from the pack was wrong. It was a sign of a weak spirit. But the thought of following the adults down the obvious, noisy path felt suddenly foolish. "Should we go with her?" Hana asked, her voice small. Chin-sun made a decision. It was the biggest of his young life. He took a step forward out of the shadows and into the light. "We learn by observing," he said, repeating what the adults had told them. "I want to observe her." Together, the 2 cubs split from the pack. They ignored the distant, fading sounds of their own kind and hurried after the human. Their paws were silent on the stone as they ran to catch up. They found Sumin at the base of the cliff. She was not staring up at it in defeat. She was studying it. Her eyes tracked from the bottom to the top, looking for cracks, handholds, and ledges. It was a dangerous climb, long and vertical with many sections of loose, unstable rock. She placed her hands on the rock and began to climb. It was not the powerful, claw-assisted scrambling of a Vulkar. It was a slow, spider-like process. Every movement was deliberate. She tested every handhold before putting her weight on it. She used the small edges of rock and tiny cracks that the Vulcar would never even notice. Her small size and lighter weight were an advantage here. She moved with a patient, relentless grace upwards. Chin-sun and Hana watched from below, their heads tilted back. The climb looked impossible for them. Their bodies were heavier, their claws not suited for such tiny holds. They had just decided they would have to go back when a small shower of pebbles came down. They looked up. Sumin had stopped her climb. She was looking down at them, her expression unreadable. She had known they were there the whole time. The cubs froze, expecting anger. They had disobeyed. They had followed her. Sumin did not speak. Instead, she lifted one hand from the rock and pointed. She pointed to a spot about 20 meters to their left. Then she pointed upwards, tracing a path in the air. She was showing them a different way. A less steep, more winding path up the cliff face that they could manage. Then she resumed her climb, continuing her own difficult route. The cubs did not need to discuss it. They hurried to the path she had indicated. It was still a hard climb, but it was possible. They scrabbled upwards, using their strength and claws where they could. Sometimes they would look over and see Sumin, high above them, moving steadily and silently on her own parallel path. After a long, arduous hour, they all reached the top. They were now on a high ridge that ran along the entire length of the sunken chasm, overlooking the main path far below. The air was thinner up here, and the wind whipped around them. Sumin was waiting for them. She stood there, catching her breath, looking at the two young Vulcar who had chosen to follow her. Chin-sun and Hana stood still, unsure of what to do. They had made their choice, and now they were face to face with it. Sumin looked from one to the other. Her face was tired from the climb, but her eyes were calm. She did not ask why they were there. She did not tell them to go back. She simply gave a small, tired smile. It was not a big smile, but it was the first any of them had seen on her face. "If you're going to follow," she said, her voice quiet but clear over the wind, "keep up." She turned and began to walk along the ridge. Then she paused, looked back at them, and added, "And watch your footing on the loose shale ahead." She turned and started moving again, her steps careful and sure on the unstable ground. The two cubs looked at each other. A wave of relief and excitement passed between them. They were not sent away. They were not scolded. They were accepted. They had to keep up. Without a word, they fell in behind her, their paws finding the safe spots on the path she had already tested. The human was no longer a solitary figure. She was now the leader of a very small, very unusual pack of her own. The high ridge gave them a perfect view of the entire sunken chasm. Far below on the main path, they could see the Vulcar pack. Daeho and his warriors were engaged in a fierce, direct fight with the rival 212th Legion. The sounds of their battle, loud growls, the clash of training weapons and simulated explosion charges, echoed faintly up the cliffs. It was a stalemate. The 212th were dug in behind a fortified wall, and the pack's raw strength could not break through. Sumin watched the battle for only a moment before turning away. It was not her fight. Her goal was the flag. She led the two cubs along the narrow ridge. The wind was strong, threatening to push them off balance. Sumin moved with a low center of gravity, her steps sure. She pointed to the ground. "The dark rock is stable. The light, flaky rock is loose. Step only on the dark rock." Chin-sun and Hana listened carefully, mimicking her path exactly. They moved in silence for a long time. The ridge began to curve, bringing them behind the enemy's position. They could see the 212th's camp now. The flag was there, planted on a raised platform in the center of the camp. It was a bright red cloth flapping in the wind. Around it, a ring of the largest Vulcar guards stood watch. Their attention was focused on the loud battle at the front. No one was looking up at the impassable cliffs at their back. The problem was getting down. The cliff face behind the camp was even steeper and smoother than the one they had climbed up. It was a sheer drop. Sumin studied the situation. Her eyes moved from the flag to the guards to the cliff below them. A plan formed in her mind. It was not a plan of force. It was a plan of misdirection. She turned to the cubs. She spoke in a low, calm voice. "Hana," she said. The young female's ears perked up, surprised to be called by name. "Do you know the sound of the Grakir beast? The one with the 3 horns?" Hana nodded. The Grakir was a dangerous predator that lived in the chasm. Its cry was a high, shrieking wail that made every Volkar's fur stand on end. "I need you to make that sound," Sumin said. "From over there." She pointed to a cluster of large boulders about 50 meters away along the ridge. "Wait for my signal. Make the cry, then stay hidden and silent." Hana looked unsure, but a glance from her brother gave her courage. She nodded firmly and crept off towards the boulders. Sumin then turned to Chinsun. She pointed to a spot on the cliff face below them. It was not a direct route down, but a series of narrow ledges and cracks that zigzagged across the rock. "Can you climb that path?" she asked. Chinsun looked. It was difficult, but it was possible for a Volkar his size. He would be exposed for the entire climb. "Yes," he rumbled. "You will not go all the way down," Sumin explained. "You will go only to that large protruding rock halfway down. Wait there. You will be my anchor." Chinsun did not understand, but he trusted her. He began the careful climb down to the midway point. Sumin waited. She took the long coil of hyperfilament wire from her pack. She tied one end securely to a thick, sturdy rock spire on the ridge. She let the rest of the coil drop, keeping hold of the other end. She then began her own climb. She did not go down Chinsun's path. She went straight down the sheerest part of the cliff, a route only she, with her small hands and feet, could manage. It was a terrifying descent, but she moved with the same quiet focus as always. Down below, the guards were growing restless. The noise from the front was intense, but nothing was happening at their post. At that moment, Sumin, hanging on the cliff face, made a sharp gesture with her free hand. From the boulders, Hana took a deep breath and let out a perfect, piercing Grakir shriek. The sound echoed across the chasm. The effect on the guards was instant. Their heads snapped up. A Grakir on the ridge above them was a serious threat. It could attack from above. 3 of the 5 guards immediately broke from their posts and ran towards the base of the cliff. Looking up, their weapons ready. The path to the flag was now much clearer. This was the moment. Sumin had reached the end of her climb. She was still high above the camp, but level with Chinsun on his protruding rock. She held up the end of the hyperfilament wire. She made eye contact with him and threw the coil. He caught it. He understood. He braced himself, wrapping the wire around his body and digging his claws into the rock. He was the anchor. Sumin now held the wire, which was tied at the top and anchored by Chinsun in the middle. It was a secure line. She took a deep breath, pushed off from the cliff with her feet, and swung. It was a long, silent, sweeping arc. She swung down and across the face of the cliff like a pendulum. The guards below were still looking up towards Hana's location, completely unaware of the small figure moving high above them. Sumin swung directly over the enemy camp. As she reached the lowest point of her swing, just above the flag platform, she let go. She dropped the last few meters, landing softly and silently on the platform. The 2 remaining guards had their backs to her, watching their comrades investigate the Grakir cry. In one fluid motion, Sumin pulled the bright red flag from its holder. She tucked it into her belt. At that moment, one of the guards turned around. His yellow eyes widened in shock. He saw the small human standing there with the flag. He opened his mouth to roar in alarm. Sumin didn't wait. She took a running start and leaped off the platform. She jumped towards the cliff face, reaching out. As she fell, Chinsun from his ledge threw the end of the wire back towards her. Her fingers closed around it. She swung back across the camp, a fleeting shadow, and began climbing the wire hand over hand, faster than any of them thought possible. The guard's roar finally erupted, but it was too late. The alarm blared through the camp, a loud honking sound that signaled the loss of the flag. Down on the main path, Daeho and his pack were pressing their attack. They heard the blaring alarm from the enemy camp. The sound was one of confusion and defeat. The 212th Legion soldiers in front of them faltered, looking back in dismay. The battle stopped. Daeho stood, panting, covered in dust. He was confused. They had not broken the line. They had not even gotten close to the flag. Yet the enemy had lost. He looked towards the sound of the alarm, his mind struggling to understand what could have happened. The victory had been achieved, but not by their strength. It had been stolen from the shadows. The return to the main base was a quiet and strange journey. The Volkar pack walked together, their usual powerful strides subdued. The dust from their failed assault still coated their fur. They had fought hard but achieved nothing. The confusion was a heavy scent in the air around them, Sumin, Chin-sun, and Hana arrived separately. They came down from the high ridges, meeting the main path near the base entrance. Sumin walked in front, the bright red enemy flag tucked neatly into her belt. Chin-sun and Hana walked just behind her, their postures straight with a new kind of pride. They did not look like cubs who had disobeyed. They looked like warriors returning from a successful mission. No one spoke as they all entered the main debriefing cave. Instructor Bay was waiting for them, his data slate in hand. His expression was unreadable. The holographic map of the chasm glowed once more, but this time it was not a plan. It was a replay. The entire exercise had been recorded by drones and sensors. Instructor Bay played it for everyone to see. The pack watched the main view first. They saw themselves, a magnificent wave of gray fur and muscle crashing again and again against the unbreakable wall of the 212th Legion. It was a display of great courage and power, but it was also clearly a failure. They saw their own frustration grow as they made no progress. Then Instructor Bay switched the view. The hologram now showed the high ridge. It showed Sumin studying the cliff. It showed the two cubs splitting from the pack and hurrying to her. A low rumble went through the adult Volcar, but Daeho silenced it with a look. They had to see. They watched Sumin show Hana and Chin-sun the paths. They saw her patience. They saw her teaching them about the stable rock. They saw her quiet leadership. Then came the plan. They heard Hana's perfect imitation of the Grekir cry. They saw the guards be fooled and drawn away. They saw Chin-sun bravely anchor the wire on the dangerous ledge. They held their breath as Sumin made her silent, swinging descent. They saw her land, take the flag, and escape before the enemy even knew she was there. The recording ended. The cave was utterly silent. Daeho stared at the now empty space where the hologram had been. He had seen it with his own eyes, but he could still hardly believe it. The victory he had failed to win with all his strength had been won with silence, cleverness, and trust. He had declared this human outside the pack. He had called her weak. He saw now that his definition of strength had been very, very small. He turned. His heavy footsteps echoed in the quiet cave as he walked towards Sumin. He stopped in front of her. He was so much bigger, a giant looking down at a small, quiet sapling. But he did not look down on her. He lowered his head slightly, a sign of respect. His voice was a low, humbled rumble. "We saw only what you lacked," he said. The words were for her, but every Volcar heard them. "We were blind to what you possessed." Sumin looked up at him. Her face was calm. She was not smiling in triumph. She was not angry. She was just stating a fact. "A pack is strongest when its members are different," she said. Her voice was clear and simple. "My strength is not your strength, but it is strength nonetheless." These words settled over the Volcar. They looked at the two cubs standing beside Sumin. Chin-sun and Hana were not cowering. They were not returning to the edges of the group. They stood firmly next to the human, their stance showing a clear and new loyalty. They had imprinted on her. They had found a different kind of pack leader, one who led with her mind and not just her claws. Instructor Bay finally spoke. "The exercise is complete. The flag was taken. The lesson is learned." He looked at Daeho, then at Sumin, and finally at the two cubs. "A legion is not a single tool. It is a toolbox. You have just discovered a new tool." The formal debriefing was over. The Volcar began to move, the tension slowly easing. But something fundamental had changed. The next morning, a new training exercise was announced. It was a long-distance patrol through a canyon known for its sudden rockfalls and ambush points. The Volcar pack gathered at the starting line. The old habit was strong, their muscles tensed, ready to run as one unified force, to lead with power and speed. But this time Daeho did not give the signal to run. He paused. He turned his head. His eyes searched the group and found Sumin. She was standing, as she often did, a little apart from the others. Their eyes met. Daeho's look was not a command. It was a question. It was an invitation. Sumin looked back at him. She saw the change in his eyes. The dismissal was gone, replaced by a wary respect. She understood the question. She gave a single small nod. Yes. Daeho turned back to face the canyon. He let out a new kind of bark. It was not the sound of a blind charge. It was the sound of a pack ready to move with purpose, using all of its resources. As the group moved out, the formation was different. It was not a single dense mass of Volcar. Daeho and the strongest warriors were still at the front, a powerful spearhead. But now Sumin was integrated into the group, her eyes constantly scanning the high cliffs, looking for the dangers that strength alone could not solve, and hurrying to keep pace at her side. Their young eyes bright with purpose were Chin-sun and Hana. The pack had been broken, and in its place a new, more capable and more intelligent one was forming. They moved into the dangerous canyon not just as a display of power, but as a complete unit ready for anything.